Hey, and we are the Coalition, Civilly Disobedient Media. We are here in downtown Woonsocket, the Quebec City, if you will. The Quebec City.
Very good.
Of northern Rhode Island. We're here with John Ward in a very different capacity. If you live in Woonsocket and somehow you haven't heard this, John Ward had announced formally at about 6 o'clock this morning that he was in fact a candidate to become the next mayor of the city of Woonsocket. Full disclosure, I've known John for a couple of years now, and we interview him routinely after city council meetings, because what he's able to do is take about a 3-hour meeting and condense a lot of the important points into about a 20 or minute or so conversation. So folks who work, folks who have little kids, folks who have all sorts of reasons to be distracted can engage with the city council. We're going to get right to conversation with John, but I think it's fair to say that the city of Woonsocket is now immersed in perhaps one of the most challenging periods in its history. And this is just a few years after words like Budget Commission were being thrown about. But the recent political demise of the former mayor has left the city in quite a quandary. But at the same time, it provides opportunities for new leadership to come on board, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, John, again, we always manage to find a busy place to talk in, but congratulations, first of all, on your decision to run for mayor. I know you've alluded to it over the years, but what finally made the decision clear? What gave it clarity?
Well, I think you mentioned this is going to be a difficult time, and in fact, it is going to be a difficult time. But I have to tell you, it's certainly. I don't know that it's less challenging or more challenging than what it was when we went through the Budget Commission time, because at that time, the city was literally up against having a meeting with the state where they demanded that we not go into receivership, but that we go to a Budget Commission. But at that time, we were literally out of cash and about to miss payroll and not be able to make a bond payment. And so we were promised a front-loading of education aid to pay our bills if we let a Budget Commission come in. And it was a means to an end to get us out of the cash flow problem and protect our employees and protect the integrity of the city. So we eventually got through it, and now we are here with this other problem, which we discussed after my last meeting of the council, where we're into this abatement period where all of these monies are being charged for taxes that are being now have to be rebated or offset in future years, and it's going to be challenging financially. That and the conclusion of the funding from the ARPA programs, both directly from the federal government and the state, it's going to be budgetarily challenging. But I think the more important thing I want to focus on is that we can balance our budget, we can make it work, we can get the things done we can get done. But I want to focus on some of the institutional practices that the city has had and some of the methods used by the prior mayor that were, I think, terribly detrimental and not beneficial to an operation of the city through the failure to modernize the systems inside the office, to put in the controls that could be done through technology, and make the place more efficient and make it a better place for people to work, so that we can actually get a better output into the community and provide for better response and better service to the people for the money they invest in City Hall for public safety and public works and inspection and safety and zoning and things of that nature. So there's challenges, and frankly, the thing that triggered this in me was when the former mayor had to resign. I started to become more aware and in touch with what was actually happening inside City Hall, and it gave me a sense of where the needs are, and gave me a better sense of where the problems were out in the community that were not, I don't think, necessarily being dealt with appropriately. And so, as I had always said to people for years now, maybe when I retire from my job, I'll think about running for mayor. And I'm confident that I'm familiar enough with how to manage a city hall, city personnel, that I can do the job. And so the opportunity presented itself to offer my service and my experience. And after I had my surgery on my heart, I literally started feeling healthier and better and more energized. And so it became evident that this was an opportunity that I shouldn't pass up, because, as I've said in other places now, you only go around the sun so many times. And you want to accomplish what you can accomplish while you still have the energy and the desire and the determination to do it. And that's the way I feel right now. And I'm really, really interested in getting in there and doing this job.
You know, a lot of folks come from a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different careers, some in business, some in public service, to a job like city council chair or to a mayoralty of any one of a number of varieties of cities, towns, communities. It's hard for me to think of anyone who is more uniquely prepared for the moment than you are. And that's coming from someone who, my regular listeners know, I'm not a big fan of government. But at the same time, your entire career arc, it can be argued, has been leading to this moment.
It can be argued that that's the case. It was never intentional. I graduated from Bryant with a degree in accounting, and I went to work in public accounting and became a certified public accountant. And I have not relied on that licensing over my career, because it's a career in a business doing things that require licensing. And I haven't, being in government, it's not a requirement of the job to be in government accounting. And quite by accident, over time, I ended up working at the Woonsocket Housing Authority, and while working there, I first got elected to the school committee, and I became familiar with some of how school districts work. And then I ended up leaving the housing authority because of political influences that were sort of pushing me out, because the current mayor then was wanting me gone because of my political positions as a school committee member. And so I found work up in Boston, and then I was recruited actually back to the school department down in Johnston by a former assistant superintendent in Woonsocket who was a family friend, and he recruited me to Johnston. And I worked there several years, and then again I bumped into a little bit of a political firestorm there, and ended up interviewing with Joe Almond in Lincoln, where I spent 16 and a half years finishing my career. And so a lot of it is very coincidental. A lot of it was motivated or pushed along by political influences that oftentimes were in a negative vein. But you adapt, you move on, you grow, and you keep working the best you can to learn and do jobs in a better and better way. And frankly, I'm glad that it happened, and I'm glad it's led me to here, where I can offer all of that experience, good and bad, as my foundation and my guides as to how I should perform the job as a mayor for the city of Woonsocket. So it has an experience factor that's huge, but it also has I guess I call it a moral compass as to what's fair to the people who work inside a city hall and what's fair to the people outside the city hall. Because I've always been a person, like when I worked in Lincoln and there were questions about tax adjustments for someone, or a write-off of this or a benefit of that, and my first question in all cases was always, and giving this benefit to this one, how will it affect all of the others who should be treated equally? And that's, I think, a way you have to approach being in the business of government. It's not like being in the business of private industry. It's a different world, and it does come down to serving the best interest of all, not serving the best interest of the few.
When you look at some of the big capital BIG issues confronting cities, issues like school funding formulas,
Yes.
issues like bonding, issues like tax abatements, the different federal programs that roll on down or up from D.C. that intimately affect city life, economic development. You know, for example, in one community, they're using a Trump-era capital gains treatment to help incentivize the funding for a soccer stadium. I mean, you've got this incredible intertwined, some would say dystopian, some might say Byzantine, but one would all agree complicated world that you have to deal in. And yet, at the risk of sounding like a fanboy, you've worked intimately in each one of them. So there's a cross-disciplinary grasp of government and private business that you're able to bring to the table that simply doesn't exist in many places. Again, it's the risk of turning this into a campaign ad. We do these
You can turn it into a campaign ad if you want
we do these conversations on the way. I've found over the years that if you try to rehearse these or have written, it comes across as stilted. But I'm sitting here, and the single biggest issue as far as the governor of the state of Rhode Island is concerned is education. You've got a challenging education system
Yes.
in Woonsocket, like any urban core, formerly industrialized northeastern city. You face the same problems as everyone else. But I'll use that as an example. Talk about some of the issues that rear up their ugly head on a day-to-day basis. Everything from RICAS to these new controlled construction bonds.
Well, it all becomes part of analysis, and that requires you to think from a variety of points of view. For instance, the state thinks that they are funding us sufficiently for our needs, and yet they also recognize, and many in the Assembly recognize, the need to better fund English language learners, and I don't dispute that, but they're not building it into a formula. They're doing it as an add-on, which means they're probably not funding it sufficient to the need, and the need is to get the people who are coming in from other areas and dealing in different languages to better acclimate or more quickly acclimate to being in America, learning in their public school system so that they can learn the other subjects. The challenge there is how to get enough staff when the staff is not around to hire in many cases. The compensation, because private industry's compensation packages have grown so much during and after COVID, in order to attract employees, they've had to become competitive in wages, which makes it very difficult to hire public employees in the teaching profession, which has received very little respect over the last 10 years. The public safety departments, especially police departments, which has been shown hostility by the public in many cases because of what may be deserved by a very small minority of employees, much the same way as any other business, who are doing the wrong things. So there's the challenge of hiring good staff. There's hiring enough staff to deal with these challenges. One of the things that was noticeable during COVID was with all of the federal money that came in, they were hiring a lot more staff in Providence and Woonsocket and Pawtucket and Central Falls, I'm sure. And they were using it to hire more social workers, more people who could deal in family intervention, because a lot of the cultural issues for people coming in from other countries and speaking other languages, they also have other cultural habits. And so there's a need to reach out to them and help them to acclimate into what is how we operate our society. Because the only other choice is to change our society to their society, and I'm not sure we're prepared to do that. So it's always a challenge. Now, I'm just talking about education there. Now, you have to take the fact that we're already dealing in a limited and underfunded education system. Then you're dealing in social services that are primarily funded with federal grants or state grants, and they tend to be always talking about how they're underfunded, and then healthcare tends to be underfunded. And in the middle of all that and trying to make up for those services, a city or town is trying to fund its own police department, which is tough to staff up. Dealing in a lot more in the urban centers, more immigration, which again is a cultural thing that sometimes leads to more crime and misunderstanding of other people's cultures and issues, so that it tends to make it a little more tense. That has to be overcome. And then you have to fund it all for capital needs. And there's the big nut you're talking about, building the school. We get a lot of good support from the state in building our new school that's coming up, which helps to make up for what we're not getting in the operational aid. And at the same time, we also have to buy vehicles, we have to buy trucks, we have to pave streets, we have to cover sidewalks, we have to clear snow, we have to collect trash, all of those things. And we have to have the equipment to do it. And many times, you start doing one thing, you sacrifice from the other. And that's where I believe in a foundation of taking care of the needs of some fundamental capital needs first. Once you pay your bonds, which are capital-based, you pay your bonds, which you're legally obligated to do, as your first expenditure. The next one should be your fundamental ongoing capital needs. Whether you're doing it through a bond because you have to, or that's the only way you can afford it, or borrowing as is available now through the infrastructure bank, or in an outright purchase through your local taxes or grants, or in your federal grant money. You have to take care of making sure your foundation is solid so that your house can be comfortable to live in. Maybe that's the best way to describe it. And the foundation is based on satisfying those fundamental capital needs to keep the city running. And then you structure your staffing and you structure your operational stuff so that you do it in an affordable way and you do it in the best service way possible. But essentially you're a service agency, and that's what we should do, is serve.
The solution for all of those challenges is of course, economic development.
Of course.
Goes without saying. And if opportunity exists in Woonsocket, and a bright spot, as somewhat of an outsider's perspective, is that a number of the costs of property acquisition, costs of housing and things like that are more affordable, in part because of the lack of economic development in this part. This is a diamond in the rough from an outsider's perspective, right before us, right outside of a major New England city. How does Woonsocket finally take advantage of that and move forward?
Well, I guess the question is, do you want to take advantage of it because you have lower priced housing because of your weaker economic activity foundation, or would you rather? But if you do develop a stronger economic base, then it may drive up the cost of housing because there may be more competition for that housing. So it's a question of how do you preserve what we have through incentivizing landlords to do it right instead of being slumlords, and how do you make sure one of the things this city has been struggling with recently is a lack of space for economic development in terms of industrial development, because there's very little square footage left or acreage left to develop any sizable industrial development. So then you're into economic development through commercial office and retail, and much of it's in a narrow section of a main street, which is being actually developed very well recently, and some other areas in downtown. And I think some of the way that was done was by creating an overlay district where some of the rules and regulations are not as stiff, and there's less effective one neighbor against the other in terms of what you can do and how you go about doing it. So it's a more effective way to attract small business into the city. But again, that may be the transition we're looking at, is not necessarily being, yes, we're the home to CVS, one of the largest corporations in the world, but we are also the home to Pepin Lumber, a lumber yard that's been here since the 1940s, intergenerationally, and is still successful and is a great place for them to do business, and the community supports them, and they support the community. So which one of those is the one that's going to help us out the most?
Well, and the question, as we posed it on the coalition, we routinely pose this to civic leaders, who is economic development in fact for? Is it the multi-generational businesses that have populated the community? Is it for families who have been here, in some cases in Woonsocket, hundreds of years? Or is it for the people that some would have them replaced by? And so what, from your perspective, and this is obviously a art and science, how do you develop a clear picture of where Woonsocket wants to be when it's been clouded for so long? That there's been a vision, but quite frankly, it's been a hidden vision and a rather twisted vision at times.
I think a lot of that comes down to doing as best you can in government to not put up roadblocks or impediments to business to feel as though they can come to your city and do business. Culturally, we're changing, so culturally the local small businesses will change. As I said, I mentioned a lumber yard. There's actually 2 lumber yards that are intergenerational family businesses in the city, and they're both very successful. I haven't seen anybody else come running in, but there are other types of businesses where there are people just getting a toehold in the community. They're starting business. They're coming in from out of the area. Families moving in. It happens all the time everywhere. And when the French came here in the 1800s, the second half of the 1800s and the early 1900s, in fact, they were the new guy in town that were populating the city. And so they had their French community, and they brought their businesses in and developed them over time. And they became those institutional, intergenerational businesses we have now that have thrived for so long. But one more generation, they may not be so much, because though that French heritage is still there, the French culture is dissipating over time. And just like the Hispanic culture, the Latino culture is coming into an area, and it will develop a strong grip or a strong participation in the community, and then they will develop their own cultural businesses, their own business base. They will succeed, and you want to be able to straddle that border between the two, and then they coexist. And it's our job, I think, in government to make sure that everybody respects everybody else's place in the community and stay out of the way in terms of burdening them with regulations and things that interfere with their ability to do business in a safe way for their customers and for the rest of the city, and to make themselves visible to the whole community and become part of it.
I've remarked to you in the past that you've got an incredibly engaged community here. And to those that deny that level of engagement, they do so at their own peril. You've got an active talk radio culture here in the city. You've got a lot of people with a lot of opinions on what direction the city should go in now, because this is a moment. This is a moment of generational change on multiple levels, not the least of which is a change in management at the top, if you will, and a rather forced change, a rather drastic change. The city council and the mayor appear to be working aggressively to sort of purge and open to the public eye a lot of the issues that were buried for so long in order to facilitate that moment. But how do you take that engaged population and come up with a vision?
That's going to be a challenge. That's why I think it's going to come down to, I referred to it in my release as righting the ship. I think we need to develop best practices in City Hall and stabilize, and then basically engage and listen to the community about where they're going. And the level of engagement of the community is a broad spectrum of people, from those who want to retain the 1920s all the way up to those who want to see 2100 come as quickly as possible, and they look forward to that. And they have different opinions about what they expect the vision of the city to be and what it looks like. There are some overarching themes for things that I would like to see in terms of, and it has been moving in that direction in terms of bringing us or turning us around and spending more time utilizing the river as an attractive part of the city, because it was always like so many rivers in the country, it was just a place to dump things. And then when that stopped, it was just something in behind everybody's building. Now we need to turn things around and make it a part of the face of everybody's building. And the bike path that runs through the state does that well along the Blackstone, and should do it for Woonsocket as well. But then, you know, we need to make it our downtown area both active, productive business locations that get exposure to people from the outside and the inside. And we have some jewels in this city that do that already. You know, when you put 1,100 people in the Stadium Theater, and for the most part about 700 of them would be coming from other communities, it's important that our downtown be attractive, have thriving businesses, small businesses, because that's what's there, and include some residential development in the area so that we can compete for housing for people who may be interested in moving to the community. But more importantly, we've got good restaurants surrounding it. We should have and make sure we have easy road access into the city, sufficient parking for a venue such as that, so that when the people come from other places, they're finding it attractive and welcoming. And that's what every community should strive for, is just be a welcoming community that attracts businesses because it's a good place to go. And there are people, a lot of retired people, a lot of not wealthy people, but that doesn't mean that they don't engage in commerce, and it doesn't mean that they don't need services and need to buy things. And so we need to make the city thrive in probably more of a small business realm than a large business realm. We are not a big box store community. We're a supermarket, department store, neighborhood store kind of community, local restaurants. There's some chain restaurants, but even this restaurant is a local chain.
Right.
So it's things like this that just make a community great. We are not going to be Munich with its medieval buildings or Paris with its Eiffel Tower. We're going to be Woonsocket as a place to live comfortably in a pleasant environment and with people who we can talk with as neighbors. That would be nice.
Final thought for today, and I just want to say, first of all, I always appreciate your time after city council meetings. Those will continue, and I look forward to having these kind of conversations as the campaign evolves. Providence was amongst the first cities in the nation to recognize that downtown corridors were no longer going to be centers of commerce per se. They were going to become centers of entertainment. And the Sikansky administration, probably with a lot of outside influences, recognized that and began the transformation of downtown Providence into arguably is one of the restaurant capitals, for example, in the nation. Well, you know, it's a great small city, and Woonsocket, because of the presence of the river and because of that kernel of activity that already exists, can assume that same role. The challenge, of course, has always been for Providence and any other city to get people to move downtown, to live downtown, to retire downtown, to engage in daily life and have enough of a, if you will, of a core of services and businesses to maintain a life that is purely downtown. Is that something you see the city of Woonsocket having a future in?
Well, as a matter of fact, much like that, Woonsocket does have an area surrounding the Stadium Theater, and basically the Beacon Charter School, which is designed around servicing those who are interested in the arts as part of their high school experience, as a main part of their high school experience. So effectively it's the development of what's being considered an art district around the stadium and the Beacon Charter School. And so, yes, there's housing being developed in an old CYO center behind the Stadium Theater. The YMCA is about to be purchased by a housing developer to turn that building into residential area. We have a place next to Ciro's restaurant that was just developed into a mix of small business and residential. We have the old, or the former fully Woonsocket Call. Now the Call rents a space on one floor, and the building is otherwise being converted upstairs into residential development. We have residential development being developed next door to that, so that there's a whole group of residential properties evolving out of what used to be principally business office and commercial retail in the downtown area along Main Street. The one spot that is a blemish that's being struggled with right now is what's near the depot, the Longley building and the old Hospital Trust bank building.
Right.
But that is actually, there are many people looking at possibilities, and we are hopeful that that will end up in a developer's hands to get properly developed, and that's going to create more residential property. And what becomes important then is that's what becomes the attractor to business that wants to come into the area to be the support system for all of those people who are going to live there. You know, part of the problem is when people talk to us about why don't we not have a supermarket in the middle of central Woonsocket is you have to point out to them that in the retail business it's all about the traffic count and the family income, demographics basically, and the traffic count. Well, we're not on the interstate highway system with off-ramps into the city of Woonsocket. We're sort of isolated, and so when you get into the inner city, it's mostly local people for the most part, and so your traffic numbers aren't so high, and your income levels aren't as high, so your shopping is going to reflect that some way in terms of what you can attract to the city. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't have good quality places for people to go, whether it's restaurant, shopping, or services in the area that they live.
Right.
And so with those developments of housing coming in, that should attract more small businesses into that general neighborhood and area so that you can get more of a pedestrian flow of people in the neighborhood as they live in the neighborhood and hopefully shop a little bit in the neighborhood and get some services in the neighborhood and live their lives in a neighborhood in a downtown area.
You know, the City of Providence was able to get significant breaks, if you will, in incentives from the state of Rhode Island. You know, for example, a special zone for art sales that was sales tax free. And there are a couple of other cities in the state that the saying is that the state almost owes them. A theme I'd like to talk about moving forward is what can the state do without getting in the way to provide additional incentives to urban core cities like Woonsocket? Is it potentially a lower sales tax rate in enterprise-like zones for cities like Woonsocket and Pawtucket and West Warwick, who have suffered economically, largely because of their former base as industrial centers? Are there things like that you'd like to talk about now or perhaps think on?
Well, I'll think on others, but I can name one right now that is very important because the state right now is prioritizing developing affordable housing. And in developing affordable housing, if they incentivize a developer to come into the city of Woonsocket to develop affordable units, and then we're going to have a property that is paying instead of paying taxes, is paying on that 8% formula that is so often associated with affordable housing that's either been renovated or new or whatever, includes a substantial renovation. The city of Woonsocket is disincentivized because that invariably ends up where that 8% is a fairly significant portion of money less than what the full tax bill would be for the property under normal circumstances. And every time one of those situations come into being, then every other taxpayer is being told they must pay the bill for that developer who's paying the 8%. And it's very similar to having family public housing in your community. 11% of our students come from public housing. 4 high-rises with over 400 units of housing are in our city that are by the Public Housing Authority. Those two things alone mean that we're paying a lot more locally on education, and we're paying a lot more locally on rescue and police services, rescue and fire services for the health and welfare of our elderly community and the education of our children. And yet, that housing authority by federal regulation only pays a very small amount of money in lieu of taxes at about $500,000 or $600,000 a year right now, against what would be a property tax of over $3 million.
Wow.
For which the state government and the federal government offer zero contribution to compensate us for that.
Right.
And so every taxpayer that comes into the city to buy a house has to recognize that they're being punished for being so generous as to have this affordable housing component growing in their community. And that, I don't know how well that gets communicated down in Providence when they start promoting more affordable housing development. It's not, I don't think, that people object so much to affordable housing, but to be asked to deal with expanded social services and other needs that come with that, and then have to pay additional taxes as a result, so that some developer, and I'm using the term in a way that hints at they've got more money than I have, is going to make a profit off of a building while paying less tax that I have to pay as a homeowner. So maybe you can sense my frustration through the lens here,
right?
But it's an issue that I don't think Providence deals with well enough and properly.
Right, in the suburbs, haven't had to deal with it as much.
They do deal with it more now, but certainly nowhere near as much as Providence, Woonsocket, Pawtucket, Central Falls, Newport.
Right. So the proliferation of affordable housing combined with the growth of the not-profit sector in this state is strangling, if you will, the communities that they're hosted by.
It presents financial challenges that are hard to overcome because it's so much controlled by the state government, but not by the local government.
Right.
And so it's something that needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
And I'll think about others.
Fair enough. Listen, John Ward, he's the candidate for the mayoralty of the great city of Woonsocket. Formally correctly now the Quebec City, if you will, Northern Rhode Island. I know your campaign's very new. Do you have social media yet, or you're going to be that'll be forthcoming?
I will have a website. I will have a Facebook presence. I will be probably doing a little bit of video presentation through Instagram or the website, and so I will be out there. I'll be making myself known, and I'll instead of putting white papers out and topic discussions, I will probably look to do them more in a video format.
Plus, your processes, your belief system, your vision for the city of Woonsocket is on display at, every city council meeting.
It is.
So,
and people can rest assured that all of it has a foundation on the discussions around the kitchen table when I was a teenager.
Fair enough. Council President Ward,
thank you.
Mayoral candidate, thank you for joining us.